Here we're going to take a second to look at the process of reading and seeing how the visual input from the words is linked to the actual meaning of words, so that when we read text, we actually can understand what is going on. And it turns out that in this case, there are actually two different pathways involved that help us with reading. And these two pathways depend on how much expertise in reading you have. If you've ever seen a young child read, you will know that reading starts off by identifying the letters and the words and then sounding them out. And then once they're sounded out, kids are able to retrieve the meaning. So that is a pathway that goes from the spelling to retrieving the phonology to then retrieving the meaning. And that's a fairly deliberate pathway that takes a lot of effort and is really involved in early learning of reading. There's a second pathway that comes more into play when people develop a substantial level of expertise with reading. And that is one where there's a direct route from the spelling of the word immediately to the meaning. And if we look in the brain where these pathways or where these areas are located, that more deliberate system is actually in the temporal-parietal lobe. So the area here is involved in identifying what a word looks like, then sounding it out, and then retrieving the meaning. Whereas later on, there's a more direct route that actually develops straight from the occipital lobe, connecting to the temporal lobe for word retrieval immediately. Now, when we look at how people read, they actually make these jumps with their eyes that are called saccades. And you basically alternate between periods where your eye is fixating on a particular part of the text and then making a saccade to a new location and then fixating on that location again. And if you look at how the time between these two activities is divided, it turns out that about 90% of the reading time is spent fixating, and then you make 2 or 3 saccades each second to a new part of the text. Importantly, when you're fixating on a word, the image of that particular word falls right on your fovea, that spot in the back of our eyeballs where there's the highest density of cones, high acuity, and you get very good processing there. The farther away from the fovea a word falls, the poorer the visual acuity, and therefore the harder it is to actually really fully comprehend what the word is actually stating. Now, I'm bringing this up in part because some of you, even at Rutgers, may have been recommended to take a speed reading course early on when you joined Rutgers, and this was supposedly going to help you with studying faster. Now, let's look at that for a second to see how you can actually possibly read faster, and if it's possible to read faster while still maintaining the same level of comprehension. Well, the short answer is no, it's not. So the problem is the following. When you take a speed reading course, most of the time people are encouraged to read by moving their eyes across the page faster, because this is really the only way to do it. It is impossible to program and execute saccades any faster than our natural rate. We do this about 2 to 3 times a second. So the only way to do it is to make larger jumps. The problem about making larger jumps is that this implies that more and more of the text is not going to fall on your fovea, but rather more on the periphery of your eyeballs. And as a result of that, your processing of those words that are more peripheral is not going to have the same level of acuity. And as a result of that, it's actually not going to lead to the same depth of processing and the same level of understanding. So in other words, speed reading courses, purely from the perspective of how eye movements work, can't actually work in the way they're supposed to.